Welcome, writer. Thank you for being a human person, keeping the internet alive for just a while longer. Take a 3 by 5 inch card and start writing. Let your pen tell you what to say. In this case, no one is going to see it. Write what you keep thinking about, the same way your tongue finds the place where the tooth used to be. Write what you need to know. Write what others need to know. Put words down until they wiggle snake-like toward a sentence. Write that sentence. Follow it. No thesis statement, no assignment, no story starter, no prompt, no outline. Just plunge in and allow the writing to tell you what you have to say. When one side of the card is full, take a new card and start over. Tell the same story again. Then take a new card and start over. When you are finished, it usually takes about 4 minutes a card, take yet a fourth card and start over again. Take a fifth card if you need to. Read the last card, then compare it with the first one. You will find you had something important to say, and it is usually not what you expected. You are a writer. Writing is not thinking written down after the thinking is completed. Writing is thinking. You are a writer. You had something important to say. Writing is thinking. When I hear these words by Don Murray, I walk away energized, excited to write. I walk away thinking that I do have ideas. I just have to tease them out, have to uncover them through the process of writing itself. His words encourage me so much more than the average writing prompt, which doesn't do anything to actually prompt or propel me into writing, and sometimes convinces me that other people's ideas are better than my own. Now you might be thinking, I promised you this amazing writing exercise that's supposed to replace all other writing prompts, but it kind of sounds like Murray is just telling us to go write and figure it out for ourselves. Now, there is some truth to that. I think he might agree with that statement, actually. But I think there's a bit more power to what he proposes here. And I think the power comes from how constrained the writing space is on this 3 by 5 card. Because it's pretty low stakes, and you know you can fill up this card in 4 minutes. And it also doesn't matter what you put on it. It can be absolute garbage because another card is coming soon. I also think it's important to use the cards to cover up what's written before. I think part of the power is, as Murray says, tell the same story again. But don't just look at what you wrote before and copy it word for word, tweaking a word here and there. But try to come at it from a different angle, try to recreate it from memory, look for those happy little accidents that occur as you try to say the same thing again, but don't say it exactly the same way. So, of course, it doesn't have to be a note card, right? You could do this with scraps of paper. You could do it with Post-it notes, cuneiform tablets, whatever method. Late in life, Don Murray actually used a Sony Clie as his handwriting deteriorated. Give the guy a break. He died 6 months before the first iPhone came out. But today you could certainly do an electronic version of this, right? Open up a new note on your Notes app for each of the 4 cards, or maybe do a page break in a Google Doc, something like that. But don't feel compelled to complete a full Google Doc, right? You could set up the page so that it's a smaller than an 8.5 by 11 page in Google Docs, or you could increase the font size to a ridiculous size. But I do think it's important to have that small constrained space about the size of a note card, and also to not look at what you've written before as you go through each cycle. But to understand the true power of this writing exercise, I also think it's helpful to know a little bit of background about who Don Murray was. You need to know that he flunked out of high school not once, but twice. And he jumped out of airplanes as a paratrooper in World War II and fought Nazis in hand-to-hand combat on the ground. And after the war, thanks to the GI Bill, he managed to graduate college by the skin of his teeth, and he worked as a copy boy in a newspaper. And he was always peering over the shoulders of the staff writers, trying to figure out how they worked their magic. And what he discovered is that very few of them saw it as magic, or saw themselves as masters at writing, but saw themselves as apprentices in the craft. And he figured a craft was something he could learn. And he did learn it. And at the age of 29, he became the youngest person ever to receive a Pulitzer Prize for his editorial writing about changes in American military policy. He's still the youngest person to this day to ever have received that particular Pulitzer Award. And so without a PhD, the University of New Hampshire hired him on to begin their journalism department. And he also, at the same time, revolutionized the emerging field of composition studies, teaching freshmen how to write essays. In addition to his scholarly work and his journalism work, he wrote novels and memoirs and poems. He wrote 9 books and dozens of articles about the craft of writing. And for 20 years, he wrote a column in the Boston Globe. And yet, at the end of his life, one of the very last column he ever wrote, he had this to say. On December 26, 2006, just 4 days before his death. Each time I sit down to write, I don't know if I can do it. The flow of writing is always a surprise and a challenge. Click the computer on and I am 17 again, wanting to write and not knowing if I can. Friends wonder why I do not take it easy, why I don't play golf or walk through cathedrals in Italy. Because I have an obsession. I write, I draw, I try to capture a fragment of life and reveal its wonder to you. I never get it quite right, but there is a joy in trying that makes me young again at 82. My New Year's wish for you, old and young, is that you find in the year ahead something you can't do. Something you can't do. Maybe this thing we strive for in writing prompts, this thing that will help us, is the very thing we shouldn't be avoided. For Murray, the power of writing is that you can't do it, that there's always more to discover. There's always more to be surprised by. There's always more to learn. And I suppose avid golfers would say the same thing, that they know that they'll never have a perfect game where they get 18 holes in ones. Dedicated tourists of cathedrals would say the same thing, that you can always find a new feature in a gargoyle that you've never noticed before. You can always see a shard of stained glass glinting in a different kind of sunlight than you've seen before at a different time of day, a different time of year. But that for Murray is the power of this exercise and the power of writing itself. In another one of his books, Write to Learn, which was used as a textbook in freshman composition classes for many, many years, Murray goes into a little bit more detail about this not knowing, about this not being able to write, and the power of that. But for that, we're actually going to have to tear apart the studio a little bit. Here we go. Write to Learn, 8th edition. If you only get one book by Don Murray, this should be it. This comes from page 13. People ask, where do you get your ideas? I answer, I don't have ideas. I am terrified of ideas. I may have a shard of ancient Indian pottery, a fragment of bone that may be dog or dinosaur, a burr under the saddle, an answer that has not yet met its question, a contradiction to a certain belief, a fragment of language that contains attention, a hint that there is an as yet unseen world around the next turn in the road that I must explore. As Graham Greene said, the novel is an unknown man, and I have to find him. When I'm lucky, I don't even have that. I have a panic nothingness, and I start to describe something that I caught in the corner of my eye, not knowing I saw it. And as I write, the barely remembered scene becomes clearer, draft by draft, the way blank photographic paper slowly reveals its image in a tray of developer. And I think that perfectly encapsulates why this exercise is so important to Murray. It has that same ability to draw things out stage by stage, card by card, as things slowly develop. And in his in Adolescent Literacy, he actually gives examples of what this looks like for him. So, in the very middle of that that description of the exercise that I read at the beginning of the video, he gives us an example of how this works for him. Example, Wimpy, in my tent, Camp Morgan, kept near my cot. Wimpy Ellis kept snakes in our tent, and all summer long he did not know I was terrified of snakes. It may have been training for combat a few years later, when, as a paratrooper in World War II, I could turn off my feelings, step over the dead or dying, and move forward. So this is apparently actual fragments of writing that he wrote leading up to this column, which he actually did publish on September 26, 2006 in the Boston Globe. And interestingly enough, in this final column, Wimpy doesn't show up. He talks about snapshots from Camp Edwards rather than Camp Morgan. I think Camp Morgan may have been like a summer camp you went into high school, and Camp Edwards is an actual Army training camp. Nothing from those initial fragments of language actually show up in the final column, other than the general vibe and a few phrases like that turning off feelings, stepping over the dead, and moving forward. The most powerful of the column comes here in the last few sentences. I shut my emotions off in basic training, and it carried me through 3 years in the paratroops. I made a conscious decision to unlock my emotions, but it took decades, and the job may not be finished in this week in which I will become 82. Understand that after the yellow ribbons are taken down, that your son or daughter, husband or wife, father or mother, brother or sister, friend or fellow worker are not the people who went to Iraq or Afghanistan. Their ability to turn their emotions off and do what has to be done is needed in combat, but is it good in the play yard, the living room, the bedroom? Usually not. Ironically, that skill was of enormous help to me when I cared for my wife during 14 years of Parkinson's and eventual dementia. The boys and girls who went to war and came home men and women will, however, at times be silent, withdrawn, and turn off the news as I do, trying not to remember, and usually not able to share a life they hope you will never know. So I hope that shows you the power of this exercise, that it's not just intimidating seeing a master writer working his craft at the end of his life. But it's also important to note that Murray doesn't just describe this as an exercise that he uses again and again, but he also describes it as the first writing exercises he would use with what he knows might become a difficult class. It's an exercise that works for beginners just as well as it does for master craftsmen who don't see themselves as master craftsmen. Okay, friends, I hope I've convinced you at this point to give this writing exercise a try. And I do want to read one last passage from Write to Learn. Again, if you only get one book by Don Murray, this would be the one to grab. But this comes from the end of chapter 1. He says, I invite you to join me as I continue my apprenticeship to the craft of writing. Come on in. Join me in the pool of language. You can make a belly flop, edge in a toe at a time, make a racing start, just dive off the edge. There is no right or wrong in beginning to use language to explore your world, what you know that you didn't know you knew, what you need to know, what you need to stand back and reconsider, what you need to share. Of course, writing the final draft is different, like the swim meet with rules and traditions, but now you should only be having fun. My way of writing is not usually to jump right into the pool, but walk around it until a word, a phrase, an image makes me want to see where it will lead. Then I slide into the pool of language and write fast, my fingers getting ahead of my brain, until I see something that needs attention, focus, research, or memory, development. As I walked around the pool today, sauerkraut came to mind. I had dinner last night with our only friends who ever serve sauerkraut, and I recently heard from my high school friend who spent 2 days in a huge crock of sauerkraut hiding from German soldiers in World War II. He has never eaten sauerkraut since. It is a favorite fruit of mine that came late in life. I see a pile of sauerkraut, smell it, taste it in my mind, and then find myself writing. Sauerkraut. That's what was missing in my childhood. And pizza and shiitake mushrooms, General Tso's chicken, corned beef, sushi, salads, and yogurt and cheese. We never once had a smelly cheese in our kitchen. I had a childhood deprived of all that was strange, smelly, even stinky, and surprisingly tasty. We ate meat with ketchup and potatoes with butter, and were proud of it. Nothing foreign for us. Of course, my family was deprived of more than food. No ideas, no arguments, no disagreement. We didn't talk religion and politics, only appearance and behavior. My folks were strong on behavior, and dress, and haircuts, and... This is going to be a fun piece to write. Of course, it's only my way of writing, and my subject. You will have to find your own sauerkraut. But that's part of writing to learn. So let's begin. Take a piece of paper and tear it into 4 smaller pieces. Find some Post-it notes or index cards if you happen to have them lying around. Open up the Notes app on your phone or Google Doc and play around with language until the writing reveals to you what you have to say. If you want to do it with me, you can actually click on the video that's showing up on the screen now. And let me know in the comments below how it went if you give it a try, or tell me about any other writing exercises you've done that are more useful than 99% of the writing prompts out there. Or tell me what you think if this guy who died 6 months before the first iPhone has something to teach us about how to write in the age of AI. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. That will really help with early engagement as this young channel grows. And that's what the channel is going to be about. It's going to be celebrating the legacy of Don Murray with writing exercises that help us put messy words down on a page, and also honoring and celebrating humans who write who may not necessarily be published authors. My next video will be an interview with my aunt who writes a ridiculous number of greeting cards and mails them out every month. And of course, there will be a writing exercise to help us write our own cards to other people who are important in our life. And so, until next time, may your writing reveal a truer truth you didn't know you knew, and a way to convey this truth to the humans who need to hear it.